Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Blackwell. Welcome back to Midpoint. Retired Delta Force operator and author of the new book, No Fortunate Son. Pike Logan thriller. Brad Taylor joins us right now, and Brad's staying around for a second segment. Lieutenant Colonel Taylor, the New York Times ran a story over the weekend that said an unhappy ISIS commander wanted to trade hostage James Foley for $750,000 and asylum in the U.S., but the U.S. government reportedly refused to even consider the request. What's your reaction to that?
I'm on side with the government on this. Anytime you start giving a hostage negotiation with money, you start exchanging ransoms, you get a lot more hostages. If you look statistically, I know there's a lot of discussion about how we should have paid for James Foley and things like that, but if you look at it statistically, there's not that many Americans that get kidnapped. There are a ton of Europeans and others who do, precisely because they do negotiate with the terrorists.
Is there any condition that you say that we could possibly negotiate with terrorists, or just blanket statement, no negotiations?
Well, certainly, I don't mean to say we shouldn't negotiate with them as a ruse. By all means, I think one of the things we made a mistake on was guys had come out of Syria and had information about James Foley, where he was, other prisoners that had been released, and we didn't do anything with that. Now, certainly you could say all along, sure, we want to negotiate, because every time you open up communications, you open up an ability to affect that guy. He's got to talk from somewhere. Somehow we can find out where that is, perhaps capture him, figure out where the other hostages are, things like that. So I wouldn't say don't negotiate. I would just say, that's a means to an end. It's not an end to itself.
Well, one time when we did negotiate, it was Bo Bergdahl and the trade of 5 Taliban commanders for Sergeant Bergdahl's freedom. Should we have made that deal?
I don't think so. I think that was a bad deal. People talk about how they're POWs and all that kind of stuff, but the Taliban themselves they're unlawful combatants. I think that was a bad deal. We didn't get a good trade on that at all.
What was the talk amongst veterans, amongst active service personnel about Bo Bergdahl? Do you think overwhelmingly they agree with you on this particular issue?
Oh, yeah, I'd say overwhelmingly they do. I mean, there's not a lot of questions that whether he's a deserter or not, the investigation's complete. They're doing their due diligence. We'll see if he gets court-martialed, but there's no doubt in my mind that he was at least AWOL. I mean, he left a combat outpost in combat conditions, putting his fellow troops in harm's way.
So a big part of it was this no sympathy for someone who goes AWOL, right?
Well, I mean, if somebody goes AWOL in the United States because their kid gets sick, that's one thing, but going AWOL when you're in combat is a whole different story.
I want to ask you about the president's efforts to close down the prison at Guantanamo Bay. It just seems like it's always in the news now of another possible detainee being let go. Are you comfortable with that?
I'll be honest, I'm not well versed on the detainees that are there. For me, it's a case-by-case basis. When we first initially started into Afghanistan, I mean, we weren't really sure what we were getting into, who we were going to capture, how they played out. So sometimes you captured Dr. Evil right next to some guy who may know some information, but not really. Well, they both got thrown into Guantanamo. So at the end of the day, for me, it would be a case-by-case basis. Is this guy a bad guy or is he not? If he is a bad guy, don't release him, period.
I wanted to ask you, what should the president be doing as far as ISIS is concerned? What should be the policy overseas when it comes to taking on ISIS?
I think that the policy he's got right now, the only thing I have a problem with is the timeline and the fact that American troops are not actually on the ground controlling airstrikes and things like that. We provide a leavening force to the Iraqi army. The problem we have right now is the Iraqi army is being led by the Shiites. You've got Quds Force, you've got the Iranians in there that are helping them out. And the Shiite militias are just as bloodthirsty as ISIS. And the only way to get rid of ISIS is to have the Sunnis co-opt the Sunni tribes that are in place. The longer we wait, the more they eradicate them. They are wiping them out in the Al-Anbar province right now. There are plenty of military folks in the United States who had served there getting emails saying, please come help us. For instance, in Mosul in the north, we're talking about retaking Mosul. If you wait too long, there's not going to be anybody left in there worth retaking. I mean, it's not a static situation. The longer we wait, the more they eradicate any allies we would have. People talk about another Sunni awakening. Well, that's only if there's some Sunnis left that you can use. They're killing them by the bucketfuls.
Well, Brad, there have been some victories. Last week, we had U.S. forces repelling ISIS forces. But what are the biggest challenges that we face taking on ISIS?
Well, the biggest challenge is the political solution. It's not going to be we can kill as many of them as we want to, but you're not going to solve the problem without a political solution. The quagmire that's Iraq right now is the feeding ground for those guys to exist. we can't eradicate them all. What's going to happen is that as Iraqi people themselves, they're going to have to solve the problem.
How is it being a book author? Are you traveling around talking about the sensational book that you wrote, No Fortunate Son? Tell us about that experience.
Well, actually, this Saturday is when it starts. I'll go on the book tour this Saturday.
All right. Well, we feel lucky that you kind of kicked us off right here on Newsmax with a little bit of information, a lot of information, I should say, about what's happening overseas. And again, the book, Brad Taylor, No Fortunate Son. It's a great read. We have it here in the newsroom. And again, thank you so much for all your service to this country and for being on Midpoint today for this Tuesday afternoon. Coming up, a second patient being tested for Ebola in Britain, and a 3-hour test that could speed up the diagnosis process. We'll tell you about that straight ahead for a Tuesday afternoon. I'm Rick Blackwell.